friends, I'm Stephanie, and I'm here to welcome you to the 7th episode of Sacred Sounds, the One License team's educational podcast to help you learn more about sacred music, old and new. You can find all episodes of Sacred Sounds on any podcatcher, Spotify, YouTube Music, Apple Music, and the One License Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X to see the latest from One License. In this episode, David and I interview jazz historian, performer, and composer Deanna Witkowski. Madison discusses Hamburg's history as part of music education in America, and Siobhan answers all your questions about One License's recorded audio license. Thanks for coming on this journey with us. The One License team had a blast creating this episode, and we just hope that you have as much fun listening to it. It's time for Creators Commentary, where we interview composers, authors, and arrangers of sacred music.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sacred Sounds. My name is David, back again, and with Stephanie, and we're joined here today with Deanna Witkowski. Deanna, how are you doing this morning?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing well. Steph, how are you?
All good here. It's an exciting day. We get to talk about some jazz piano.
Oh, yeah. Oh, perfect. All right, Deanna, we'll start out how we always start out. If you had to introduce yourself to someone and you know that you only had a little bit of time, I don't know why I'm phrasing it this way, how would you summarize yourself to someone who just wants to know, who is Deanna Witkowski in a nutshell?
I'm a musician and a scholar and a writer. So that would be my summary. There's many ways to expound on that, but I'm a jazz musician who was classically trained. I play a lot of different styles of music. So I'm a jazz musician and a church musician. I'm a liturgical music composer, and I also have done quite a bit of writing. I wrote a biography that came out from Liturgical Press a few years ago on Mary Lou Williams, who is a big influence in my life. She was a jazz pianist and composer from Pittsburgh who wrote a lot of sacred music.
The question that pops out to me, hearing that you're a jazz musician and sacred music musician, how do those two worlds come to intersect in your life?
Well, so I didn't grow up listening to jazz at all. I kind of discovered jazz toward the very end of high school and then into college. And I went to Wheaton College outside of Chicago, which really doesn't have a reputation for being a jazz school. I actually direct their jazz ensemble now. I've been doing that just for the last semester. And I got into jazz from studying with my saxophone teacher in college, and eventually started jazz piano lessons. But, you know, one of the first churches I visited when I moved into Chicago right after graduating from Wheaton in the 90s was a church called LaSalle Street Church. And the first Sunday I visited, they had a jazz group. They were having a special service, and they were doing more traditional jazz, New Orleans jazz. I noticed that no one in the congregation was singing except for on like When the Saints Go Marching In. And so I introduced myself to one of the pastors and said, you know, I'm a jazz musician and a composer and arranger. And if you ever do a jazz service again, I would be interested in, you know, participating somehow. So that ended up being the church that I attended at that time for the 4 years I was in Chicago in the 90s. And basically I led an annual jazz service there. So I was given like the hymns from the worship committee and just figured out what to do. I had an instrumental quartet that we were leading the music. I arranged stuff for the choir. And that was kind of the beginning of it. And then when I left, in 1997, I applied for a full-time Episcopal Church music position in New York at All Angels Church, and they said they wanted someone who played a lot of styles of music, could lead a gospel choir, which is also a different thing. But they really emphasized they wanted a composer. And I thought, well, this sounds like me. So I applied, I got the job, and then I started writing music for them. And there was never a thought necessarily of like, is this jazz? Is this whatever? Because I don't think you need to label it. But I was writing music for them all the time. I was arranging stuff for the gospel choir like every other week. I wrote 2 mass settings. I wrote tons of psalm settings, tons of congregational music. So when I left that position, a few years later, I realized I had this body of work, and I started, when I would tour with my jazz trio, we started doing things in churches. Then music directors asked, do you have written out piano scores? And that's when I started writing out piano scores for everything. So essentially now, like on my website, I mean, I don't even have everything up there, but I probably have like 90 pieces or something. It started because I basically saw a need. I saw that people weren't singing in this particular church. They were more listening and observing, but not, fully participating in the way we kind of think of that term, with the and so I wanted people to be able to fully participate by singing.
The two things that kind of intersect here are your work as a composer and work as an ensemble leader. Do those ever come into tension between, like, when you're playing jazz with an ensemble, you have to give up control to the soloist, but like you as the composer, it's your quote unquote work. So do those two roles ever come in tension?
Well, I would say so. To back up, when I'm doing music, in a church situation, when I'm leading, that's very different than just leading a band doing a concert. And most of the time I'm in small groups. So say trio, meaning piano, bass, drums. I'm usually also leading, at least singing, or maybe added with a horn like a quartet. So in the cases of when we have jazz or we're leading congregational music, I mean, we're always aware of what environment we're in or kind of why we're doing what we're doing. And in those cases, when we're leading people, someone's not going to go off and play a 10-minute solo and then expect the congregation to come back in. I mean, I'm very aware of, I'll play interludes the same way between, say, verses on a hymn every time, or send music ahead to the music director who will actually be able to play it because I have scores, written out there. It's a little different than if it's like a concert with my group or playing in a jazz club or something. I mean, when we've played together long enough that we just have a sense of how to play together, so we're still kind of following something, whether it's the structure of what I've written, the tune, the chord progression, etc., whatever. And then, if there's something that like not working, I mean, we'll address it in a rehearsal or something. I think by being a composer, I mean, whether or not you're playing classical music, I think you're giving up control because other people are interpreting your music, and also there's differences when you're working with professional musicians or professional instrumentalists versus when, you're a music director at a church and you're working with everybody from like kids who have played violin for 2 years to, professionals perhaps, or maybe not. So there's a whole different way of, thinking of like community music making, how you lead or how you even teach a piece of music, or people learn in different ways. Like some people will learn by ear, other people want to see written out, and then bringing those people together so they can all participate, I think is a big thing.
From those two worlds that you mentioned, because it's so fascinating, right? Like performance side of jazz that you mentioned, like playing in clubs or whatever, and then leading worship in a worship service. Can those two aspects of your musicianship, do they contribute to each other? Like, does one help the other side and vice versa?
Sure. I mean, and I don't really, I don't think of things as like totally different from each other. Maybe some of the rep that we do is different, but still I've done like, some of my jazz hymn arrangements in jazz clubs, or I do instrumental pieces that have no connection to a particular, say, scripture text or something, in a church. I also don't feel like one of those is an act of worshiping God and one isn't. I mean, they both are. If I'm a worship leader per se, or a congregational music leader, I want people to be able, in all those cases, I want people to be able to come with me. But if I'm expecting people to sing with me, there's just certain things that I have to do very clearly. Right now, I'm not like on staff at a church. So usually the places I go, I'm there for like one Sunday. So as a guest, I really need to make things as clear as possible so that people feel as comfortable as possible, and with the idea that they can still use the music after I leave. So it's not just for that one time. And that's one thing that I do feel is unfortunate about sometimes when we label things or we say, this is jazz, that it's like, okay, well, let's do this special jazz worship service. And then we never do it again. Rather than like when I had several music director jobs in New York, it was like, well, this is just part of the repertoire. and because I could play lots of different styles. So it wasn't like, oh no, and now we're doing this thing, like not at all. That's just one thing that I notice a lot. It's like when you make something be kind of like an other, there's limitations, I would say. Yeah.
I love the idea of repertoire in service of community music making. And you've talked about Christopher Small in your writing and his idea of musicking. What is your hope for congregations who use your music? How do you hope they music with your music?
Kind of a couple hopes that I have. I think the most common reaction I get is surprise. Surprise that the music works. Or like the people who, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten the comment, oh, I really had my doubts about how jazz was going to work in the service, which is like, okay, you didn't really need to tell me that, but whatever, and then there's always a but, it just flowed with everything and whatever. I think I want people to not just be able to, participate by singing, but to also have an element of surprise of how the music makes the experience of either the text or something about the piece, like just access a different part of them, more open to God in some way. I think harmony can really do that. And that's something that's a big part of my work. And also, over the last few years, I've really had this sense several times really strongly when playing in churches that I want people to be able to rest. To be resting with some tune that's upbeat and joyful. It's rare that we have moments when we're with a group of people when we can actually, be, I don't know if vulnerable is the right word, but at least present to be able to just rest or have a sense that when we walk out of that space, something about that we can go back to in our memory and feel like the presence of God.
That's like the highest goal with music, right? Is to make God present to the people hearing it.
Steph and I have done 3-4 interviews already. Yeah. And with each person that we've spoken to, it's cool how the common thread is the music gives us and the congregation like a deeper access to God.
Going back to this idea of repertoire, I know in some of your videos you've talked about how the traditional hymn repertoire kind of can serve us in the same way that like the Great American Songbook can serve jazz musicians in a secular context. So like you can use hymns the same way that Billy Strayhorn would use a Gershwin tune. Can you talk a little bit about how you make your choices about which hymns to go to, which pieces from the repertoire you want to focus on?
For instance, so I did a recording about, 2017, I guess, called Makes the Heart to Sing jazz hymns. And, I have all these hymn arrangements that I've done over the years and I still do in churches. I can send, say, the music director the charts or the written out piano stuff, but in order to really understand the feel or the rhythmic feel of the music, I need to have recordings. So I would just be like sending all these like recordings, like here's when we did it from, St. So-and-so church in Minnesota, whatever town. So I thought, okay, I need a record that kind of pulls some of these together. But those tunes in and of themselves, or those arrangements, mostly came from specific jobs, music director jobs I had, where it was one of the hymn tunes for the day that we did. Holy, 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 or all creatures of our God and King, or, and then I wrote an arrangement for that day, or say one of the times when we would do that particular tune when I might have instrumentalists with me, and that wasn't always the case. So for the recording, I picked the ones that I thought these are probably the most well-known, the ones that are done the most, but in the moment of actually picking those individual tunes when I first arranged them, it was usually because we were doing them in the context of a Sunday morning service. Yeah. And then I've had a lot of people ask if I'm going to do another record of that. I haven't done it yet. But I certainly, have enough other arrangements of hymns that would be very possible to do that.
Speaking of upcoming projects, if we can switch gears and talk a little bit about your work as a scholar, can you talk a little bit about what is your research for our listeners, and how does that influence your work as a working musician?
Well, so Mary Lou Williams is somebody who, she was a jazz pianist and composer who influenced a lot of I would say, more well-known jazz musicians like Thelonious Monk and Charlie Parker and even Miles Davis and Bud Powell. But I came to her because back in like 25 years ago in 2000, I was invited by the late Dr. Billy Taylor, who was friends with Mary Lou and was at that time the artistic advisor for jazz at the Kennedy Center, to perform at the Mary Lou Williams Jazz Festival at the Kennedy Center. And at the time, I didn't know very much of Mary Lou's music. So, and I just refer to her as Mary Lou rather than Williams, not out of, it's sort of out of familiarity, because I feel like she's been, a saint, like, for me, or a mentor. So I started at that time to check out a lot of her music, and there was a new biography that had just come out then about her called Morning Glory by Linda Dahl. And I read that, and kind of from reading that first, so Mary Lou had a very interesting life story. She converted to Catholicism at the age of 47 in 1957 in New York. And she was African American, and she was baptized at St. Ignatius Loyola in New York. It's located on the Upper East Side, which is a very, I will say, white, affluent area. I picture her a lot walking up the steps there. When I found out she had written 3 jazz masses that I learned from this biography, I was like, okay, so, why is there only one of them that I can go find? And that's kind of how the research started. It was like, I wanted to hear the other 2. Her archives are located at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey, just outside of New York. So I went there. I spent a bunch of time. This was like, no one was like, write an article on Mary Lou or do this. I was like, I just had to find this stuff out. And so I kind of started doing research on my own, and then realized she played such a breadth of styles. I mean, so like my latest recording from 3 years ago now, called Force of Nature, is a Williams tribute, and it's about 12 of her pieces, and one of my originals I wrote for her. So some of those came from transcribing because I couldn't find sheet music anywhere. And then, some I just arranged for my group in different ways. But the book project came about from Liturgical Press because they actually contacted me. He's no longer there, but Andy Edwards, he works for University of Virginia Press now. He had heard an interview about Mary Lou. I can't remember who the interviewee was, but on NPR, and, learned about her story, like her conversion, and thought, wow, we need to have Mary Lou be one of our subjects for this series that they had called People of God. That's all on figures who were Catholic, who were known for some particular thing. Andy contacted me, and then, of course, I ended up doing a lot more research for that, and then starting to go from New York to Pittsburgh a lot, where Mary Lou was from, which I understand, Stephanie, you're an hour north of Pittsburgh. And when I started going to Pittsburgh, I was like, oh, I really like Pittsburgh. Research totally shaped my life, because I ended up deciding, I think I want to live in Pittsburgh for a while. And I applied to a PhD program in jazz studies and musicology, basically, at the University of Pittsburgh as partially as a way to be in Pittsburgh. I can't say I necessarily recommend that as, your path for like moving somewhere. Just apply to a PhD program, I mean, I was really motivated to also finish my program. My program was 5 years and I got it done in 4. All that to say, I mean, Mary Lou basically, I feel like, led me to Pittsburgh for a while. And then, I ended up buying a house that when I bought it, I didn't realize it was a mile from her gravesite. I went there a lot. So my work with her music, I mean, has certainly led to things like a few years ago, I did a project where her second jazz mass was a Lenten mass that she wrote for a church in Harlem that is no longer a functioning church, called St. Thomas the Apostle, that became part of my dissertation. It was a Black Catholic church on West 118th Street, a block away from Minton's Playhouse, which was one of the birthplaces of bebop. I was able to kind of reconstruct and reimagine from recordings she had in her archives of the work, and do that piece with the Stonewall Chorale in New York and my trio. I'll send you the link for that, because that you can watch on YouTube. And right now it's as far as I know, it's the only like reference kind of recording of that's, publicly available. That was a whole little long project. And then Jazz in the Pews, the subtitle is Experiments in Sunday Worship in the 1960s. And that's a project I'm working on now that I did for my dissertation, but it's all just an outgrowth of this. So it's about this church in Harlem, St. Thomas the Apostle, that had a jazz ministry from 1967 to 71. And then St. Peter's, which is a Lutheran church that's had a weekly jazz vesper since 1965, that's in Midtown Manhattan. And I've played at St. Peter's many times. It's looking at a couple of kind of case studies, one being Mary Lou and her Lenten Mass that she wrote for St. Thomas, and another African-American jazz pianist and composer named Eddie Bonamere, who became the music director at St. Thomas for a while and wrote 5 jazz masses for them, and then was one of the first jazz musicians hired at St. Peter's to start to do things on their Jazz Vespers series. Kind of looking at a lot of things that were happening at the time in the late 60s. And including, it's not just right post-Vatican II, but also looking at Black Power and ecumenical movements that were kind of shaping a lot of theological thought. And I have an article that's, it should be out any day now, on Mary Lou's Lenten Mass in a journal called Jazz and Culture. And then I'm doing a project for Princeton's series called the Crossroads Project, where they feature Black religions in the Americas. And so I'll be creating an online exhibit on the jazz ministry at St. Thomas, and that should be going up like next summer. It is a book project that I'm hoping once I am a little more settled, I can get more happening on it. And, and I've been in talks with a publisher about it. So
that's so awesome. I will just point out that New York does not have French fries on its sandwich. So.
Oh, yeah, right. Right. Or on salads.
Exactly. We know how to do French fries here. We're really awesome at that.
That's awesome.
Goodness, that is funny. Yeah.
We see kind of like the intersection of a few roles in your life: performer, church music leader, scholar. You're kind of wearing multiple hats at once. Do you think differently? Do you think about different things when you're wearing those different hats? Or how do each of those roles feed each other?
Well, I don't think I know exactly how everything feeds each other. I mean, I certainly think it does. I'll tell you one thing that I find very confusing about academic writing, I will say. So when I wrote my dissertation, one of the comments I got from some committee members, they liked it and they thought this was important work for people to know about and everything, but was that I should put myself in the narrative more in terms of talking about my own work as a church musician / composer, liturgical jazz composer, how that influences historical research that I'm doing or have done. And I found that kind of confusing because I always thought, well, you're not supposed to put, yourself, you're not to say, I, this and that kind of thing. You have to think of what voice you're writing in. But at the same time, I've kind of realized over even the past year and a half, because last year I spoke at a bunch of different academic, not even necessarily academic, but educational conferences, I'll say. So one was Jazz Education Network Conference. So that was mostly jazz musicians and educators. And one was American Catholic Historical Association. One was the Black Catholic Theological Symposium. And so it was kind of a mix of musician educators, maybe theologians, and I realized that in all of them, I think it really helps to be able to articulate my practical work, or should I say my work as a practitioner, maybe, has led me to this particular project. Because sometimes people will say, well, how did you think of this cool idea for a project? It's well, it didn't just, come from the sky or something. I mean, it came because I've been doing this for so long. So I will say that I'm very conscious, and I think, this is because I've done a lot of interviews and things over the years, different, radio, TV, print, for different recordings and for the book. And, I have 7 recordings. 2 of them are in particular, I would say, are sacred music, jazz hymns record, and an earlier record from 2008 called From This Place that has jazz mass on it. It's can be difficult, but it's very important to be aware of who my audience is, all the time in all those interviews, because like, for instance, I can't refer to like the Mass ordinary, I'm not going to say that in in most contexts, even not even in most Catholic contexts, because a lot of people won't know what it means, unless maybe I say it and then say, and this means X, kind of thing. With so much division, and things, I don't even like referring to like, say, Catholic, Protestant, or, different things like that, because it may put a wall up for somebody. I try to stay aware whenever I'm writing of like, who is this for? Or who do I want to read this? And frankly, I'm not interested in just writing for academics. I mean, I don't care too much, which, even though, I'm talking with an academic publisher, hopefully, publishing Jazz in the Pews in a few years. I mean, I think because my work is so multi-pronged and in, different spaces, it's like, I mean, when I did, more of a presentation on this church in Harlem that had this jazz ministry in the 60s at this Jazz Educators Network, I had people saying, who found it fascinating and everything, and then were asking me, okay, I want to do a jazz vespers at my church, or I've done one and I need more resources. And so I was like, rather than just thinking, oh, it's the church music directors who are on the, list for GIA or something, there's also, I mean, just, jazz musicians who are like looking for more resources too. I don't know if this answered your question, but I will say when I do performances, or like, even so, I mentioned that I'm the jazz ensemble director at Wheaton College this year, and I never like to just do a piece and have no background about it. I'm never going to say, and this is this tune by so-and-so person. Like, I just can't do it because I feel like this tune, okay, even if I know nothing about where this piece of music came from necessarily, I got to know something about the person who wrote it or whatever, or be able to present it in such a way so that it's like there's some point of interest that people can engage in, so, being a historian means being curious and wanting to, find out why things happen and how they fit together, and also being frustrated all the time that you can't find all the information when you do archival work, or you find the beginnings of a thread and you can't find the end of it. And
because you presented all this amazing work that you do in so many different communities, so many different contexts. If I could take present day Deanna Witkowski back in time before Deanna started all of these different branches of work in all of these contexts, what would present day Deanna say to younger Deanna?
That's a hard question.
Yeah, it is.
I don't know, but in some ways I feel like it's the same thing I'm telling myself now, which is that I'm going to find some place where I'm going to be rooted, because I haven't found it yet. The thing where like God is going to bring me out onto a level plane. That's the one thing that comes to mind.
I feel like Mary Lou Williams is a great patron saint in that direction.
Yeah, Mary Lou, especially while I was living in Pittsburgh, I talked to Mary Lou a lot. I mean, I never met her in person. So she was born in 1910 and died in like 81. And I certainly met people who had met her or played with her, or would say like, oh, I sang, her mass, in so-and-so church in whatever year. She certainly was always having to do so much more than survive, but even just to survive as a musician. I think for myself, as somebody who decided to go back to school after so many years, I think I've had a different experience than a lot of the people who were in my program. Not everyone, but, I was mostly the oldest person. I'm just at a point right now where I'm like, I'm not sure what's coming next. I mean, I'm on the academic job market, and, and I've applied for a ton of things, and I've moved again. I moved to Chicago without having something in place. And now I'm at a point where I don't want to have to keep moving. It's really taxing, and I want to be able to do my work. So, I mean, it's funny because right now, right in front of me, well, you can see this, but I'm finishing Virginia Woolf's A Room of Her Own, which is basically about, like women need a room of their own and $500 a year. Now we need a little more. Yeah, I totally get it. I just get it. I mean, and I want to be a part of a, worshiping community that's like, that I can, learn from and contribute to and all of those things. And I also think that especially like, I don't know if it's just post-COVID or whatever, but I think the ways that people relate to each other are just so different, less social.
And it all goes back to the community aspect, right? I think what we all crave is community in a physical space together. And like you mentioned, this kind of post-COVID disconnect, it hurts.
Even with my children this morning, we talked about being human with Steph getting ready for this interview. I'm like, all right, now we have to be human. As funny as that is, just the fact that it was mentioned, and maybe a theme of my morning, and it coming up here again, it's cool that as musicians who can work in this sacred music context, that we do have the opportunity to hopefully bring the congregations that listen to our work, to listen to our music, the opportunity to be present, right? And I think connect that to the opportunity just to be human again. That was great hearing you share that. All right, and as we wrap things up, we're getting close to wrap things up. If you had anything to share with our listeners who may be license holders here with one license, anyone who's listening, what is your message that you would want to share with them all?
Well, I really appreciate the fact that one license exists. I often wish, sometimes I go to or present on some of these conferences, or like there needs to be panels where there's a composer and a music director and a pastor, maybe. I'm not sure, together talking. I know when COVID happened and I was getting lots of people emailing me because I'm mostly self-published. And then I would get all these emails about, hey, can I use your, We Belong to God, Psalm 100, for a live stream. And then like I made a little form that people could fill out if they didn't have one license, because a lot of them didn't. And then I would see some of these webinars would be like, music directors are saying how much work it is. So I appreciate, first of all, that one license makes it, as streamlined as possible. And I want to say that as composers, or I'll just speak for myself, I really appreciate the time that music directors take to log their usage, because you may think, why am I doing this or whatever? Well, you're partially doing it because you're supporting people who wrote the music for you to use in the first place. Whether you're getting a check for like $10 or $100 or like whatever it is. I mean, what I think a lot of music directors may not know is that, so for myself, someone who's say I'm also affiliated with BMI, which is a performing rights organization, but BMI cannot collect quote unquote performance royalties for worship music that's done in the context of liturgy or a worship service. So it makes a humongous difference to actually just log your stuff, because that affects, what the composers, like twice a year, we get reports. And it's also helpful to see the reports, to have a sense of like, oh, okay, this piece is, getting more traction than this one maybe, but it also just translates into like financial support. But, I do kind of think this can point to a larger thing of how do we view, let's just say artists or musicians as like, how do we, welcome them into our, communities. Music is like, in our culture, it's basically here for free, and we don't take into account the people who create it. Those people like need to be supported if they're going to be able to keep creating it, so that means like logging your usage, or like hiring, them for when when you want to do a jazz service and you've never done it before, you can contact me and, book me and book my group, or, things things like that, like being willing to do that stuff sometimes and just have it, be part of the fabric of your communal life.
On that topic, speaking of learning more about you, can you tell our listeners where to find out more about you, how to get in touch if they do want to buy any of your music?
So the best place to start is to go to my website, which is deannajazz.com. So that's DEANNA jazz.com. And I have a section on there that's all scores. I have recordings. I also have a contact page where you can contact me regarding booking. There's a whole section on there, a whole page called Sacred Jazz, where you can see videos of some of my work in different church settings and workshops that I offer. That's the best place to go.
Perfect. And you said you are currently in the Chicagoland area, so available for booking.
I am. Yeah. And I do, and I do travel too. So in the last, since grad school, I haven't traveled quite as much, but like in March, I think is the next big thing I have out of town. I'm doing like a jazz vespers at a church in Richmond.
Perfect. Well, there it is, listeners. We need to book Deanna.
Yeah, and if you hear of any schools that need tenure track, music faculty.
Yes.
I mean,
100%.
It's very interesting because I do lots of times people tell me you tell people you're looking for something and then someone knows of something and, it wasn't because it was on the College Music Society job board, I mean, you never know, so it's just trying all the possible ways of getting the word out.
Exactly. Well, we have faith because you have all the skills and there's so many doors. So I'm sure those doors will open. Thank you so much, Deanna, for your time this morning and for all of the insight, the inspiration that you provided us and all of our listeners.
Thank you. It was fun to talk to both of you.
Join us for The Chance of a Lifetime, our exploration of traditional hymn tunes and the people who made them.
Welcome back, everyone.
Hey, Madison. Thanks for coming back to us. For listeners to our show, on each episode, Madison's going to be telling us the story of a different tune in the public domain.
Exactly. Today's tune might be a little less familiar, but if you live in North America, this composer has probably had more of an effect on your life than any other composer we've discussed so far.
Now I'm hooked. Who is this mysterious composer and what is this effect on my life?
Well, the composer is Lowell Mason, and we're going to talk about his tune Hamburg. If you've ever taken a general music class as part of your primary or secondary education, you can thank Lowell Mason for that.
I normally don't thank people who give me homework, but I clearly love music class, so I'll give Mason a pass. But how did a teacher get in our hymnals?
It makes more sense when you consider that Lowell Mason began his musical career directing multiple church choirs and his educational career by serving as the superintendent of an interdenominational Sunday school.
Okay, I can kind of see how education and church music would mix there.
For Mason, it was equally important to teach good singing as it was to teach theology. He believed that proper singing was synonymous with proper worship, so teaching music was a form of catechesis to him. Few things could aggravate Mason like bad singing during services and bad behavior during class.
I can guarantee my good behavior, but I bet Mason would not be happy to sit next to me during services.
I'd like to think that Mason would view it as an education opportunity. He was passionate about helping people, especially children, sing better so they could worship better. Mason even founded the Boston Academy of Music in 1833 because he wanted to equip other music teachers with the tools to help students.
Oh, 1833 is impressively early when you think that the country was just a little over 50 years old.
Right. Formal education, at least for children in the United States, was in its early stages. So it's almost impossible to overstate the importance of Mason's contribution to the field of music education.
After he started the Boston Academy of Music, did he still work with young students?
Absolutely. In fact, the Boston Public School Administration was so impressed by Mason's work that they hired him to replicate in the public schools what he had achieved with his singing schools and churches. Mason became the first person in America hired to teach music in public schools.
You weren't exaggerating when you said that his work affected pretty much all of our lives then.
Not at all.
What was Mason like as a teacher? I'm having trouble picturing a man in the 1830s teaching hot cross buns on plastic recorders.
True. He did not use plastic recorders, but Mason's educational philosophy would sound familiar, even to modern teachers. Mason believed in the teachings of Johann Pestalozzi.
Gesundheit.
No. Pestalozzi was a really influential educational theorist during the Enlightenment. He believed that all children were equally capable of learning, that knowledge was freely accessible to anyone who sought it, and that it was the teacher's job to simply help the students unlock new pieces of knowledge.
Oh, I think I would like being in his class.
I wouldn't doubt it. Pestalozzi believed in structuring classes as object lessons. That is, each class revolved around an object or item, physical or otherwise, that the students had to experience for themselves. Teachers call this experiential learning, and that philosophy still drives teachers today.
That makes sense to me. The best way to learn something is by actually doing it. So using lesson time to introduce kids to new, quote unquote, objects would mean that kids are gaining concrete knowledge each time.
Exactly.
Now, I can see how object lessons work in like science class, where you learn to identify different plants by examining each plant's leaves up close. But how does that work in music class? What objects do singers manipulate?
Well, in object lessons, objects don't have to be physical. They can be intangible. So for singers, something like a scale or even a song could be an object.
And musicians learn by manipulating and using that object.
Right. Lowell Mason believed in teaching the sound before the sign. In other words, students would learn to hear and sing something before they saw it written out in music notation.
This sounds like a very cool way to learn music. So Homburg would have been one of Mason's musical objects then.
We can look at it that way.
So what makes Homburg a good learning experience for congregational singers?
Homburg is a great learning tool because it's simple, regular, and easy to remember. In fact, most of our listeners are probably already familiar with this tune in the form of When I Survey the Wondrous Cross.
Absolutely, I'm with you.
Mason based his tune on a Gregorian chant melody that appeared in Vincent Novello's The Evening Service, published in 1822. Mason's adaptation, which we know as Homburg, is especially simple.
Simple enough for even me to sing?
I guarantee it. The range of the melody is only a fifth, from the 7th scale degree to the 4th scale degree, or T to Fa, if that helps to think in solfege. And the 7th scale degree, or T, is only used momentarily to embellish the 1st scale degree, or Do. So the vast majority of the melody lies between the 1st and 4th scale degrees, or Do to Fa.
I'd like to believe that my vocal cords can handle that.
Most likely. And the melody's form allows you to memorize it quickly and feel comfortable right away. Homburg is only 16 measures long, and if you divide those 16 measures into 4 equal phrases, the melody plays out in ABAC form.
It's been a while since my kindergarten days, but doesn't the alphabet usually go ABC?
Indeed it does. But when we're talking about the form of songs, we assign a letter to each section of music. Whenever different sections are represented by the same letter, that means the music is the same in those sections. So a song in ABAC has 4 sections, and the 1st and 3rd sections are the same.
Okay, I see. So we have a section of music, another section of music, then we repeat the first section of music, and finally end with a 3rd distinct section of music.
Correct.
You mentioned that listeners probably associate the text, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross, with Homburg, but I'm starting to like the thought of this simple object. What other texts can I pair with Homburg?
That's the beauty of this tune. Its meter is an 8-8-8-8, or 4 lines of 8 syllables each. That is an immensely popular meter, so you can fit hundreds of texts with this tune. Try out I Know That My Redeemer Lives, All People That on Earth Do Dwell, or On All the Earth Thy Spirit Shower. They'll all work because they all share that 8-8-8-8 meter.
I can pretty much just sing one song over and over again every Sunday now.
Well, please don't do that. But thank you. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll talk more next time.
Looking forward to it, Madison. And speaking of adding new text to old tunes, in conjunction with our Chance of a Lifetime segment, One License is posting a public domain blog series. In each blog, we'll look at and expand on the hymn histories that we talk about here. You can find all One License blogs at news.onelicense.net, or you could sign up for the One License newsletter by visiting onelicense.net, and have the blogs delivered to your email inbox each month. As part of the blog series, the One License team is offering listeners and readers the chance to become published authors as well. Each month, we're asking you folks to write your own text to accompany the public domain tune that we've discussed, and email your original text to info@onelicense.net. The One License team will publish a few of our favorites in the next blog post so that we can all expand our poetic repertoire and worshipers all over the world can incorporate your inspired poetry into their praise. If you're interested in submitting a text, please do email it to info@onelicense.net with the subject line Sacred Sounds, and we're looking forward to hearing from you soon. Let's hear from your inquiring minds. In each episode, we'll answer a question that we received from a listener like you. If you have a question about One License, copyright usage, or sacred music in general, please email that question to info@onelicense.net with the subject line Sacred Sounds, and your answer could be next.
Hello, friends.
Hey, Siobhan, thanks for coming back for another tutorial for us. For those of you who are tuning in, this is one of our Inquiring Minds segments. So this is where you, the listeners, can write in and let us know the questions that are on your mind, and we'll speak to you directly.
Yeah, this is such a great idea, and I'm excited to talk about all the things. And I'd love to know what sorts of questions our listeners might have for us.
That's right, everyone. So if you do have questions about sacred music or copyright, just email info@onelicense.net with the subject line Sacred Sounds.
And I think you said you have a good one for us today, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, Lisa from Clarksville wrote to us asking about the new recorded audio license. Her music director heard about it at a conference and would now like to know what that license covers. Her church already has a podcast streaming license, so Lisa is wondering exactly how the recorded audio license is different from the podcast streaming license.
Ooh, I love this question. There's lots of differences between podcast streaming and recorded audio, so listeners should clear their schedule for the next couple of hours, and we'll dive right in.
Even though I personally am free all day, what if we stick to the basics for the purposes of Lisa's question?
You know, your idea is better. Okay. The recorded audio license allows you to create and use recordings of titles copyrighted by One License member publishers for rehearsal and worship purposes. And the license can cover usage of two different kinds of recordings, commercial and non-commercial. So commercial recordings are professional recordings that you purchase directly from the member publisher or stream from the member publisher's online platform. And then non-commercial recordings are self-made recordings, like you and your in-house musicians.
Okay, I get it. Recordings I buy versus recordings I make.
Yes.
So what about using other people's recordings, like some YouTube videos of other organists and choirs that are really good that I'd like to use for my congregation and musicians?
Right. Okay. That's a good point. Yes. Those YouTube videos are also non-commercial recordings, but since they belong to someone else, you would need to get permission of the recording's owner to use that recording, as well as permissions of the performers, in addition to the member publishers, the copyright holders' permission. So you can usually contact the recording's owner directly through their Facebook or YouTube channel page, whatever that is. And then as long as you're able to get their permission to use their recording, you can then report that usage as non-commercial recorded audio.
Why non-commercial recorded audio? I thought non-commercial meant self-made.
Okay, yes, good point. The non-commercial really just means that the recording wasn't commercially produced by the member publisher. So commercial recordings are the member publisher's recordings, the copyright holders' recordings, and non-commercials are any recordings that somebody else made.
I see. So really, those YouTube videos from other folks are non-commercial because they're also self-made, just by selves who aren't part of my congregation.
That's good. Yes, that's the way. That's a good way to put it. So the difference is that when it's not your non-commercial recording, you have the extra step of arranging for permissions with the owner of the recording. And then, of course, you still need the copyright holder's permission, and that's the member publisher.
Is there any difference in the way that I can use commercial recordings versus the way that I can use non-commercial recordings?
No, you can use both types of recordings in the same way, so long as the member publisher has approved the title for commercial and non-commercial usage.
What are some of the ways that I can use these recordings?
So like I mentioned, you can use these recordings for rehearsal and for worship services. So there's a lot of flexibility built in there. For example, you can distribute recordings to your musicians to help them practice, or you can play recordings as background accompaniment during rehearsal or during a worship service.
So if I'm teaching my choir a new anthem and I want them to listen to it on their own before we start rehearsing it, I could use a recorded audio license to distribute recordings.
Exactly. Yeah. It's worth noting that no one needs a license just to share a link, like to a YouTube video or a Spotify recording, if you just, share that link with your group. But if you're downloading the recording and sharing the file, then that's when you would need recorded audio permissions. And the same would apply if you purchased a commercial recording on CD or cassette and made copies for your choir.
In short, anytime I store the recordings or make more copies of the recording, that's when I need the recorded audio license.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. For instance, if you're embedding the recordings in something like PowerPoint slides or Google Slides, then that would be reproduction of recorded audio. So the recorded audio license would be required to embed recordings of titles from our member publishers into slides.
Well, I'm not that tech savvy myself. Maybe it would be easier if my congregation stuck to recording our own musicians and using those recordings when necessary.
The recorded audio license allows you to do it that way as well. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned flexibility. Can I record different parts to help different musicians?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people use it that way. So if you're wanting to make rehearsal tracks for your musicians, you can record the different parts separately. Like you can make a recording of the soprano line and then a different recording of the alto line, or you could record just the accompaniments so the soloist can play live over the recording. You could even maybe record tricky sections of music that you want your musicians to practice specifically. Like if everybody's having trouble with the modulation at measure 48, you could record measures, 30 to 55 to help them work through that section.
Can I reharmonize those tricky parts or simplify parts for my musicians?
No, that would be altering a piece, and that's beyond the scope of one license permissions.
Okay, that makes sense. In general, if you want to alter a work, altering permission has to come from the copyright holder directly.
Yes, that's right. So we like to say there's a lot to think about with copyright, and we're always ready to think through those issues with anyone who contacts us. And if we don't have the answer, we'll try to point them in the right direction. So I think we have thoroughly explored Lisa's questions, so we'll wrap it up here. And thanks everybody for tuning in. And don't forget to send your questions to info@onelicense.net with the subject line Sacred Sounds.
Hey, thanks, Siobhan.
Take care, Steph.
Thank all of you so much for joining us on this episode of Sacred Sounds. It was a treat for the One License team to have these conversations, and we're looking forward to many more like them. Next time, David and I review Deanna's Comfort E in our liturgical listening party, so if you enjoyed Deanna's interview, come back for that. Madison untangles the intricate web of minds and cultural forces woven together in Old Hundredth, and Siobhan teaches us about making manual submissions through the One License website. Just a quick reminder that you can find all episodes of Sacred Sounds on any podcatcher, Spotify, YouTube Music, or Apple Music, and the One License Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X to see the latest from One License. Until then, Lord, open our lips, and our mouths will proclaim your praise.